Ever felt something was off in how we build and design digital products and tools? Yep, so does Bob. Bob is responsible for shaping how a product looks and feels, what we would consider a UX designer. He is given the task to design a specific feature for the product, and he gathers requirements and specifications from stakeholders. He feels something is off. He doesn't know enough about the source of the request. What problem does this new feature solve? Which need does it address? And which desire does it satisfy? And how does this fit in the bigger picture? But before he has any chance to ponder about these excellent questions, he remembers that design needs to be done by the next sprint. So he quickly starts formalizing some ideas, making them tangible. In between hectic shaping sessions, he gets some scattered feedback from users, filters through multiple ears sometimes, and then he thinks to himself, right, new feature. So let's say he manages to create some mock-ups in Figma. He does a nice presentation. It looks coherent, makes sense conceptually, refines them a bit, and then gets them all ready to present to some users. But they all seem quite disengaged while testing, and most have a hard time to relate to what he is presenting. But he makes some quick tweaks, gets a handover to the developers, and the loop continues. But what did he learn in this process? Did he truly get to test his idea or explore multiple paths to the same outcome? And I would argue no. But let's say in a perfect world, he got to do proper user testing, measuring outcomes continuously, before and after something went in production and while he was user testing. I would say it still takes a long time until he gets feedback from his users. And he needs to observe, reflect, internalize before any learning happens. And I'd say that's one of the core problems for Bob. The time from action to feedback is so long, and taking risks and big bets in his environment is not encouraged. And understandably so, because of the heavy investment in time. And compounding to this, he's also often set to create deliverables instead of achieving specific outcomes. So, I'm Fredrik. I'm a designer at HelloStavanger, and honestly, I've been Bob more times than I'd like to admit. I felt that same frustration when the time between I make an action, make something real, until I get feedback is so long that learning just stalls. And over the years, I realized that gap, that time between action and feedback, and the quality of the feedback can be the difference between a good and a fantastic product. And I would say design and development of digital products and tools are learning systems. Every action we take affects surface, product, service, organization, business, society. And getting learning from that is crucial. The faster we learn, the better our products become. So, let's bring back Bob. What if Bob touches a hot stovetop and he feels no pain and there's no visible injury? But only weeks later he gets blister and a sharp pain in his finger. And let's say in this scenario he magically avoids seriously hurting himself due to his inability to feel pain. How long will it take him to learn that it was a stovetop that hurt him? And in that specific configuration of being hot? I would say almost impossible. But yeah, it's a silly analogy, but I think the point still stands. We humans need fundamentally, need sensory feedback to learn. And the time between we do something and the feedback is crucial. And there is a sweet spot probably, but all we really know is that it needs to be pretty close to the action. It can get too close, where it disrupts our ability to reflect on the action before we get the feedback. But quantity is also key to learning. So in design, we usually meet a problem or need or desire to achieve an outcome. And between those 2 points is an almost infinite amount of possibilities and paths to take. And exploring just one path in a complex environment, especially in a complex product, is very time-consuming. And of course, we have heuristics. So heuristics is a mental shortcut, a rule of thumb that gives us speed in problem solving. It's very useful, but not 100% accurate. Context matters, culture shifts, perception shifts, and expectations shift. But they're very nice to have for common problems when we do design. But of course, when you're breaking new ground, expert tools, or especially now, once we have now, different ways of interacting with AI systems, VR, AR, there's still plenty of problems not solved. But luckily, we do have new tools that have risen out of this new AI hype era. Tools like Bolt, Lovable, DataButton, V0, Figma Make, and probably hundreds more, if not thousands, considering the investments being done. And a lot of them market themselves as from idea to market or production. Maybe some have toned it down recently, but that's the way, at least how they started. I found them more useful to go from idea to learning. But are they really useful in this context? And I would say, yeah, kind of. It depends. It is situational. Testing a linear flow with very low complexity, not so useful. And they are janky. They will hallucinate and they will do weird stuff. But if you provide enough context, they start being quite useful, especially want to test complex stuff with people. And of course, they can be frustrating at times. This is not my proudest moment, but it is what it is. So every idea goes through a set of some sort of process. They pop up somehow by formalizing them. We materialize them, and then in the end, hopefully we validate them either voluntarily or not. But for me, I found them extremely useful for materializing. So they are pretty great at taking instructions once you have formalized a set of ideas. For me, they haven't been that great for formalizing ideas, but to bring them alive and make them more real, it's been fantastic. Because it also brings that part of design, how it works, closer again to the designer. The past 10 years, UX has been relegated to a lot of aesthetics. How it looks, not necessarily how much it feels, or sorry, how it works. So let's say we bring back Bob, and he gets asked, should we have a drag and drop feature here? How would that feel? Well, then he can, of course, use one of these new tools, put in the design system, the concept, the data models, and it will create this idea for him in how he describes it with a database so that he can test this with real people or himself to feel how it will actually be in the context that he is in. Or if you have multiple people, one set of persona does something and another one needs to quality check or do something in response to the action of the first one. And since these are pretty much self-contained web applications, you can do that with the database because the first action will be permanently stored in the database and the other person will actually see the full reflection and they can actually test how this will actually work. And then Bob gets a bit bored and he makes angry builds, where he launches builds into categories to see how that feels. Not a great idea, but it only took him 5 minutes. And this idea, again, can spawn multiple other things. Or maybe we can have fun as designers again. Who knows? And you've probably seen this one 10 times today, so I'll just skip over the basics. Every new innovation trigger usually launches us into some sort of space where we think it will solve every problem. I would say, for design at least, I see a slope of enlightenment in how AI can actually produce productivity for us. But then again, you're not here to hear the fundamentals of learning. So, in the past year, I've been using these tools with clients with varying degrees of success. And I'll take you through some examples that were at least slightly successful. So, we've been working on a workforce management solution for a client. And what that means is basically they have a bunch of people, several thousand, they need to know who is working where. So you have two types of people that do the main job of this. You have people that are responsible for resources, and then you have people responsible for the business activities. And then, of course, you have upper management responsible for overseeing everything. And of course, they were the ones requesting this thing, so we had to start digging. Great. You guys want this, but to make this a good solution for you guys, we need to make it a good solution for the people actually doing the work. So we quickly started working with potential users, etched out the concept, make some information architecture, several iterations, and we turned something which was somewhat complicated into something which was quite simple, we hoped. But we also had quite a lot of objects and with a lot of data in this setting, which meant we had to map this out and confirm, is it true? Is this actually how you want to interact with these objects? So we had to map out all the metadata, the properties, the relationships, and the actions on each object, map that onto a conceptual entity diagram. And so great. And we all kind of like shaped this with the client, with the users, but then we had that one big question. Does this actually make sense? And we didn't really know, because we maybe talked to 10, 20 different users, but all of these had varying degrees of amount of responsibility, different varying amounts of access to data, and so the data relationships became quite complex. So we gathered the concepts, we had some wireframes, a data model, and we started feeding that into the AI models. So we started with make the big outline. So basically, we just tell the large language model the big concept, why we want to make it, the context it lives in, all the data models, and then we started giving it shape. We added some details, and in the end, the finishing touches. And so, for this prototype, we basically built an entire dummy application of the entire information architecture, where we can upload the entire data set in the front end, take it to users, and then we can select which role in the company and the department. And then all of the data is connected as intended, which means we can go to a person, ask them where do they work, what role do they have, set that in, and they can start using it in exactly the context that we would expect with the exact data that they would have access to, meaning that whenever they click around, whatever data they see would be the one we expect them to see. And of course, this one looks quite wireframey, which was intended, which is also one of the great things about these models and tools. They take instructions very well. And in this first meeting with the client or with our users, we wanted it to look rough. We wanted them to avoid talking about color, alignment. We just wanted, like, do you find what you need when you need it? And since this is also basically vibe coding, we could add fully interactable stuff within the prototype. So we also added main interactions, or the main stuff they could interact with, which would be their main tasks within this system. So for the people responsible for the business activities, they could build out a fully fledged resource plan, and we can watch them do it. And of course, we also used all of their standardized roles, job structure, and we could test that that actually made sense. HR said it would make total sense. Sort of. In reality, it kind of did. But what was really interesting was to see the difference in interaction that had when we could show this compared to the Figma prototypes or wireframes. People were more engaged, and they took it a lot more seriously. And most importantly, the users actually felt fear. They were afraid of clicking something that would not be reversible. So suddenly we had great observations, could do some tweaks, and quickly learn where do people struggle, what actually works, what doesn't, and where do people feel fear, and where is it okay that they feel that fear, because it can be good with some friction. So great, we had the big overarching information architecture validated, actually works. And we could get down to roughly a minute and a half for even people that never had any of these concepts in mind before to complete the main tasks. Great. But we still had one left that we didn't test yet, which was the requests. So this one gets a bit complicated, because the people making the resource plan, great, works fine, but they need to ask formally for the resource from the people responsible for the resources. So we did a slightly more detailed prototype for this one. Or I should say many. This one was the one that we ended up actually using. So this one takes the resource plan data sent to it and displays all the requested roles to them. And they're fully interactive, hooked up to a database, and they can start clicking around. Which means we can add business logic, verification, error messages, warning messages, and see how people actually respond. Do they understand it? Are they able to propose resources to this request? And do they actually understand what is going on, the process? And most importantly, do they try to circumvent business logic? Which usually they tried. But of course, this spawned the natural question. How does it feel to talk to your resource plan? So simple idea. So first iteration, we threw up a 10-minute prototype, hooked it up to, it was probably Google Gemini. They have a very nice free tier with lots of tokens. We just added some instructions to that model, got vibe coded in the available tools, and hooked it all together using the prototyping tool. And what was so great with this one, so we spent, I don't know, less than an hour, and then we could take it out to people. And I could observe how they would actually interact with this. And pretty much all my hypotheses were blown out of the water. Nobody interacted with the way I thought they would. I would think that they would just write like short, like, yeah, do this, do that. But people started writing half essays, trying to befriend. One of them tried to befriend the AI to make it do better stuff. I don't know. So we quickly figured out that this utopia, at least short term, of interaction design, of taking away all other buttons and input than just having a way to talk to it, to do things, sort of failed. So we made a new one with more stuff, which performed more in the way we thought people would interact with it. So this is where, again, like the heuristics that are there already does not really support the use cases of these interaction models. But having these AI prototyping tools gives us that ability to try them out. And it's very cheap. Because the initial, let's say, wireframes we did, nobody believed in them, didn't get buy-in, nobody would even talk about it. They just heard AI and then shoo. But when we started actually creating it, making it interactive, making it real, people took the discussions more seriously. And especially when we could actually show up with observations, how people actually used it. And we could actually learn what do we need to design for it further on. So these initial prototypes were super helpful because it also created more buy-in from upper stakeholders, which then again creates more interest in the potential of the product. But there are also some other, I would say, interesting use cases when it comes to prototyping with these tools. So in the beginning of this project, we were basically overloaded with massive amounts of data from multiple sources with multiple data sets from each source. And the clients gave us a brief of what this data was, what it meant. And they were saying, yeah, yep, now you got it, that's easy. And none of the team really understood the relationships. So then I was like, okay, cool, let's just boot up a Bolt. Let's just make some tools that collates all of this data with the descriptions and actually hooks everything together in the way that the client says it is. Which meant that early on, we could actually see how everything relates to each other, but which also was pretty nice insight in the beginning of just prototyping these tools just to understand the main data, was that we got new personas from the data in a sense. Because then we started seeing different roles with different departments and different new relationships within there, which then we saw the difference in what kind of data and how much data they had access to on different department levels and different roles. Which meant we had better questions that we could take on to our users and our clients to further explore what this actually means. And we could actually start asking questions about the data itself. Do they organize it in a good way? Is this how people will actually want these to fit together? Because we did see some anomalies, which they also saw as well once we started actually collating it all together. So I guess I can take you through some practical tips or speculations from just one guy trying this out. I'd say the first question you need to answer to be able to put into one of these models is, why are you making the thing you are making? It is crucial for some reason. So, context. It's a word everyone has heard a million times already, but it really does matter. The environment, what you're making it in, what is it? What is the data model, if you have any? Hopefully you have some sort of thing in your mind. And entity relationships. Of course, all of this sort of depends. Like if you're doing an early prototype for one singular idea, just throwing in a first prompt, spend 5 minutes, see what happens, perfectly fine. If you want to test something more complex, you're going to have to be more take things in discrete steps if you want to make something more complex, where relationships of data and interaction matter. Because everything you don't say, the AI will infer. Which is where language comes in, like details, phrasing, specificity. All of these will matter heavily. But language can also be visual. So using natural language and visual language at the same time means you're saving a huge amount of time. There's a reason why people say a picture says 1,000 words. It's true. If you're doing a very specific thing where you need a specific layout or a specific look, explaining that in text is going to be quite tedious. It's a reason why you just can link to a design system and then use that as a reference for the AI. Try explaining Google material to an AI from scratch. I enjoy. And sort of, round it up. Like, if you're doing complex prototyping, start with the outline, add some shape to it, details, and finish off with the last finishing touches. If you're doing too much in one prompt, it creates some messy outcomes. And you're going to have a hard time dragging it back again, because if you didn't give it the proper context and proper time to digest it, it's going to make decisions that are going to be hard to reverse. So does these tools change anything? I would say yes. Short term, I'd say they're great for speed and exploring things at detail levels that you are not able to in Figma. So it depends. But I would say it brings designers closer to how a product works. And I'd say that's a pretty good thing. But it also enables more play. Something I would say is somewhat lacking in modern design environments. So pressured on time that we just have to deliver. But if you have tools that can help you produce or materialize your ideas, you have more time for play. But they're also very interesting for collaboration. Using these tools with the team has created a quite new dynamic in a way. They get a closer look at how I intend things to look and behave, but we can also explore together in new ways that just isn't possible in static images or, well, Figma in general. Figma prototyping, or at least the one that's been out for years, it's great for linear stuff, information, but anything interactive, anything where you need to manipulate data, it's completely useless. But this also kind of raises the bar a bit in terms of what we can do, and also how you can play around with more complex stuff also enables you to look further ahead. But what the most interesting thing for me has been the communication aspect with users. That's been the biggest game changer. Sure, you have speed, super nice, that's awesome. But putting something in front of people that look real, behaves real, it makes people engage with your idea in ways that I haven't seen before except for production, which makes validation earlier possible with greater detail. And of course, you get to see more emotion. So for materializing, fantastic, and it brings you faster to that validate step. But personally, I haven't had that great of an experience in terms of ideation. Sometimes, but generally not that great. It's fantastic for throwing things at the wall and see what sticks. And then you kind of pick up the pieces, or you kind of start seeing, you did that in a shit way, I'm going to do it better. So, which means good thinking, at least my belief, will still be as important as ever, if not more important. Because using these tools will force you as a designer to think more thoroughly through your concepts, your ideas, and how it will actually behave. You can't just offload that to developers to figure out. You have to engage with it yourself. But you also have to understand people, their context. And hopefully, these tools will give you more ways to do that. And of course, bringing the time between action and feedback close as possible. And the fidelity of the quality you receive is actually fantastic. Because too many times, I've seen users nod, agree, they click around. Sometimes you have to ask them, so what did you expect to happen when you click here? And they're not engaged. But the truth is only revealed when they actually interact with something they are convinced is real. And therefore I believe that seeing is believing, but interaction is conviction. Thank you.